package arrived on my doorstep in Maplewood, Ohio, just as the morning sun was painting long shadows across the well-maintained lawns of Elm Street. I'd been sitting on my front porch, nursing my second cup of black coffee and watching the neighbors begin their Sunday routines when the delivery truck rumbled to a stop. The driver, a young man who couldn't have been much older than my grandson Tyler, approached with a white styrofoam cooler that seemed oddly light in his hands. "Harold Mitchell?" he asked, checking his clipboard with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd made 1,000 such deliveries. "That's me," I replied, setting down my coffee mug on the small wicker table that my late wife Barbara had picked out at a garage sale 15 years ago. The ceramic surface was still warm against the humid June air, and I could smell the faint aroma of the neighbor's roses drifting over the property line. "Happy Father's Day, sir," the driver said with a genuine smile as he handed me the cooler. "Someone must think pretty highly of you." I thanked him and watched as his truck disappeared around the corner where the Hendersons lived with their 3 golden retrievers. The cooler felt strangely light in my weathered hands that had spent 32 years working as a union electrician for Local 683, wiring everything from suburban developments to the downtown office complex where my daughter Ashley worked as a marketing coordinator for a pharmaceutical company. Inside the house, I set the cooler on my kitchen table and lifted the lid. There, nestled in melting ice packs, was a whole frozen chicken. Not exactly what I'd expected for Father's Day, but then again, Ashley had always been practical. The bird was a decent size, maybe 4 pounds, and wrapped in the kind of clear plastic you'd find at any grocery store. A small card was tucked beneath it, written in Ashley's familiar handwriting. "For Dad, Happy Father's Day. Love, Ashley." Something about the whole situation felt slightly off-kilter, though I couldn't quite put my finger on what. Maybe it was the timing. Ashley usually called first thing on holidays, but my phone had been silent all morning. Or perhaps it was the choice itself. In all my 63 years, I'd never received poultry as a Father's Day gift. I moved to the kitchen window, the one that looked out over the backyard where I'd taught Ashley to throw a softball when she was 8 years old. The grass needed cutting, and the tomato plants Barbara had insisted on planting every spring for 20 years were starting to show their summer growth. Everything looked normal, peaceful even, but that strange feeling of wrongness lingered like the taste of copper pennies. I decided to call her, partly to express my gratitude, and partly to satisfy the curiosity that had been gnawing at me since the delivery arrived. Her phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail, her voice bright and professional. "Hi, you've reached Ashley Mitchell. I can't come to the phone right now, but leave a message and I'll get back to you as soon as possible." "Ashley, it's Dad," I said after the beep. "Just wanted to thank you for the chicken. It's thoughtful. Give me a call when you get a chance. Love you, sweetheart." The chicken needed to go into the freezer, but something made me hesitate. I picked it up, feeling its solid weight, examining the packaging more closely. The label was partially torn, as if it had been hastily removed and reapplied. The price sticker was missing entirely, leaving only the ghost of adhesive where it once stuck to the plastic. Barbara's voice echoed in my memory, something she used to say when Ashley was a teenager. "Trust your instincts, Harry. They're usually trying to tell you something important." She'd said it about Ashley's first boyfriend, a kid who smiled too much and never looked me in the eye. Turned out he'd been stealing from the church youth group fund. My instincts now were whispering something I didn't want to hear. The chicken sat there, ordinary and innocent, but carrying with it an undercurrent of something that made my chest tighten. I placed it in the freezer, between a bag of frozen peas and the remnants of a casserole that my neighbor Mrs. Peterson had brought over after Barbara's funeral. The phone rang just as I was settling back into my kitchen chair. Ashley's name appeared on the caller ID, and I felt a small surge of relief. "Dad, I got your message." Her voice was bright, perhaps a little too bright. "Did you like your gift?" "Well, it's certainly practical," I said, trying to match her cheerful tone. "Though I have to admit it caught me off guard. A frozen chicken isn't exactly traditional Father's Day fare." And then she laughed. Not the warm, genuine laugh I remembered from her childhood, but something sharper, with an edge that made the hair on my neck stand up. "Oh, Dad," she said, and there was something in her voice that sounded almost amused. "It was from the trash." The words hit me like cold water. "What did you say?" "I said it was from the trash," she repeated, and now I could hear something else in her voice, not just amusement but a kind of satisfaction that made my stomach drop. "I was cleaning out my freezer and found it buried in the back. Figured rather than throwing it away, I might as well send it to you. You know how you hate waste. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The kitchen suddenly felt too quiet. The only sound the steady hum of the refrigerator and the distant drone of someone mowing their lawn. Something had shifted in the conversation, some fundamental understanding that I couldn't quite grasp. My daughter had just told me she'd sent me garbage for Father's Day, and she seemed to find it funny. The conversation with Ashley ended abruptly after I managed to mumble something about being grateful for her thoughtfulness. But as I hung up the phone, her laughter still echoed in my ears. That sharp, almost cruel sound that bore no resemblance to the daughter who used to giggle uncontrollably when I'd tickle her feet during Saturday morning cartoons. I found myself staring at the freezer door, trying to process what had just happened. A chicken from the trash. For Father's Day. From my only child. Barbara would have known what to make of this. She had an uncanny ability to read people, especially Ashley, in ways that I never could. Women understand women, she used to tell me when Ashley would storm upstairs after one of our teenage arguments about curfew or homework. You just love her through it, Harry. That's your job. But Barbara had been gone for 18 months now, and I was still learning how to navigate this new relationship with Ashley without my wife's gentle guidance. The heart attack had taken Barbara quickly, too quickly for proper goodbyes or final wisdom about how to handle our increasingly distant daughter. I walked to the living room where Barbara's reading chair still sat by the window, her bookmark still marking her place in a romance novel she'd never finish. The afternoon light streamed through the sheer curtains she'd hung the previous spring, casting everything in a golden hue that made the dust motes dance like tiny spirits. Ashley had been different since the funeral, not dramatically so, not in ways that others might notice, but in small, unsettling shifts that accumulated like snow in winter. She'd become more focused on money, asking pointed questions about my pension, my social security benefits, whether I'd considered selling the house. At first, I'd attributed it to practical concern. After all, she worked in pharmaceutical marketing, dealt with numbers and projections daily. It made sense that she'd worry about my financial security. But there had been other changes too. The way she looked around the house during her visits, her eyes cataloging and calculating. The sudden interest in family photos, asking if she could borrow some of the older ones featuring her grandmother's jewelry. The questions about Barbara's life insurance policy, which had been modest but sufficient to cover the funeral expenses and pay off the remaining mortgage. You know, Dad, this house is pretty big for just one person, she'd said during her last visit in April, running her manicured fingers along the mantel where Barbara had displayed our wedding photos. Have you thought about what you'll do with all of Mom's things? I told her there was no rush, that I wasn't ready to make those decisions yet. Her smile had been understanding, but something flickered behind her eyes. Impatience, maybe, or disappointment. Now, sitting in Barbara's chair and thinking about that frozen chicken, I wondered if I'd been missing something important. The practical gifts had started after the funeral, a subscription to a meal delivery service that specialized in senior nutrition. A medical alert bracelet that I'd never asked for. A book about aging gracefully that had arrived with no note or explanation. Each gift had come with that same bright enthusiasm in her voice when she called to ask if I'd received it, the same tone she'd used today when telling me about the chicken from her trash. The phone rang, jarring me from my thoughts. Mrs. Peterson's name appeared on the caller ID. "Harold, dear, I hope I'm not disturbing your Father's Day," came her familiar voice, warm with the slight tremor that had developed since her own husband passed 3 years ago. "I was just wondering if you'd like to join me for dinner tonight. I made too much pot roast again." Eleanor Peterson had been our neighbor for 15 years, a retired school librarian whose husband had worked at the Ford plant until it closed. She'd been a godsend after Barbara died, bringing casseroles and checking on me with the perfect balance of concern and respect for privacy. "That's very kind of you, Eleanor," I said, and found myself genuinely grateful for the invitation. "I'd like that." "Wonderful. 6 o'clock? And Harry, how was your Father's Day? Did Ashley do something nice for you?" I hesitated, unsure how to answer. "How do you explain that your daughter sent you garbage and seemed to enjoy telling you about it?" "She sent me a chicken," I said finally. "How thoughtful. You know, these young people today, they may not do flowers and cards like we used to, but they show love in their own practical ways." After we hung up, I realized that Eleanor's interpretation was exactly what I'd wanted to believe. What I'd tried to believe, even as Ashley's laughter had chilled me to the bone. Maybe I was reading too much into things. Maybe grief had made me suspicious and overly sensitive to perceived slights. But as the afternoon wore on, I found myself returning to the kitchen, opening the freezer, and staring at that chicken wrapped in torn plastic. Something about it bothered me beyond the simple insult of receiving trash as a gift. The packaging looked wrong somehow, as if it had been handled roughly or stored improperly. I thought about my years as an electrician, how I'd learned to trust that feeling when something didn't look right, even if I couldn't immediately identify the problem. Faulty wiring often looked fine on the surface, but there were subtle signs. Discoloration, unusual wear patterns, the wrong type of connector for the application. Details that could mean the difference between a job well done and a house fire 6 months later. The chicken had those same subtle wrongness markers, but I couldn't decode what they meant. All I knew was that my daughter had laughed when she told me it came from her trash, and that laughter had contained something I'd never heard from her before. Something that felt almost like contempt. Dinner with Eleanor Peterson turned out to be exactly what I needed. Her pot roast was tender, her conversation gentle, and her dining room filled with the comfortable quiet that comes from decades of friendship. We ate at her kitchen table, the one by the window that overlooked both our backyards, where we could see the fireflies just beginning to blink in the gathering dusk. "You seem troubled tonight, Harold," Eleanor said as she refilled my coffee cup. Her eyes, sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses, missed very little. "Is everything all right?" I found myself telling her about the chicken, about Ashley's strange laughter, about the growing collection of practical gifts that had started arriving after Barbara's funeral. Eleanor listened without judgment, her weathered hands folded in her lap, occasionally nodding or making small sounds of understanding. "You know," she said when I finished, "my daughter Linda went through something similar after Robert passed, started bringing me things I hadn't asked for, making suggestions about what I should do with the house, the furniture. I think sometimes they get anxious about us aging alone." Her words made sense, offered a rational explanation that I wanted to accept. But as I walked home across our adjoining backyards, breathing in the sweet scent of honeysuckle that grew along our shared fence, that uneasy feeling persisted like a low-grade fever. Back in my kitchen, I found myself drawn once again to the freezer. The chicken sat exactly where I'd placed it, but something was different. The ice crystals that had been forming on the outside of the plastic wrapping were gone, as if it had thawed and been refrozen. But that was impossible. I hadn't touched it since morning, and the freezer had been working fine. I picked up the package, feeling its weight in my hands. The torn label was more noticeable now, and I could see underneath where someone had tried to scratch off what looked like a date stamp. The plastic felt slightly sticky, as if it had been handled with dirty hands or stored somewhere unclean. A memory surfaced suddenly, sharp and unwelcome. 2 weeks ago, Ashley had called to ask if I had any cash around the house. She'd been vague about why she needed it, something about Derek's business opportunity requiring immediate investment. I'd offered to write her a check, but she'd insisted on cash, said it was time-sensitive and banks were slow. I'd given her $300 from the emergency fund Barbara and I had kept in an old coffee tin in the pantry. Ashley had been effusive in her gratitude, promising to pay it back within the month. But something about the urgency, the insistence on cash had left me uncomfortable. Now, holding this suspicious chicken, I wondered if there were other things I'd been missing, other signs I'd dismissed as grief-induced paranoia. The next morning, I woke with an unusual heaviness in my chest, a feeling like I'd been breathing thick air all night. My coffee tasted metallic, and I found myself taking smaller sips than usual. Probably nothing. I'd been sleeping poorly since Barbara died, and sometimes that affected my appetite. But by mid-morning, the feeling had worsened. A strange tiredness that seemed to seep into my bones, making even simple tasks feel exhausting. I'd planned to mow the lawn, a chore that usually took me 40 minutes, but after 10 minutes I found myself sitting on the porch steps, oddly winded. Eleanor knocked on my door around noon, carrying a plate of her famous chocolate chip cookies. "Harold, you look pale," she said, studying my face with concern. "Are you feeling all right?" "Just tired," I told her, though even as I said it, I realized I felt worse than just tired. There was something wrong, something that made my stomach feel unsettled and my head slightly foggy. Probably just the heat. She felt my forehead with the back of her hand, the way mothers do with feverish children. "You're not warm, but you don't look yourself. Have you eaten today?" I tried to remember breakfast and realized I'd only managed a few sips of coffee. The thought of food made my stomach lurch slightly. Not much appetite this morning. Well, that won't do, Eleanor said with the authority of someone who'd raised 3 children and taught elementary school for 30 years. I'm making you some soup, something light for your stomach. After she left, I sat in my living room trying to make sense of how quickly I'd gone from feeling fine yesterday to feeling so off today. It wasn't like any illness I'd experienced, not quite nausea, not quite fatigue, but a combination that left me feeling disconnected from my own body. The phone rang, and Ashley's name appeared on the caller ID. "Hi, Dad. Just calling to check on you." Her voice was cheerful, almost musical. "How was your evening? Did you do anything special for Father's Day?" "Had dinner with Mrs. Peterson," I said, and was surprised by how hoarse my voice sounded. "Oh, that's nice. And the chicken? Have you had a chance to cook it yet?" Something about the question struck me as odd. Why would she assume I'd cook it so quickly? "No, it's still in the freezer." "Well, don't wait too long," she said, and I could hear something underneath her casual tone, an eagerness that didn't quite fit the conversation. "You know how food can go bad if you keep it too long, even frozen." "Ashley," I said, the words coming out before I'd fully formed the thought, "where exactly did this chicken come from?" There was a pause, just a heartbeat too long. "I told you, Dad. I was cleaning out my freezer and found it in the back. Rather than waste it, I thought you might use it." "But why would you have a chicken in your freezer that you were willing to throw away?" Another pause. Well, Derek bought it for one of his cooking experiments. You know how he likes to try those expensive organic things. But it got pushed to the back and forgotten, and by the time I found it, I figured it was probably not good anymore." Her explanation felt rehearsed, too detailed for such a simple question. And there was something else. A nervous energy in her voice that I'd never heard before. "I see," I said, though I didn't see it all. "Anyway, Dad, I should run. Derek and I are meeting some investors for lunch. Love you." She hung up before I could respond, leaving me staring at the phone with a growing sense that nothing about this situation was as simple as it appeared. The uncomfortable feeling persisted through the afternoon, settling in my stomach like a cold stone. Eleanor's chicken soup helped a little, but every few sips brought back that metallic taste that seemed to coat my tongue. I found myself checking the freezer repeatedly, staring at that wrapped chicken as if it might reveal its secrets if I looked hard enough. By Tuesday morning, I'd made a decision. Something wasn't right, and 32 years of electrical work had taught me that ignoring warning signs was never wise. I called my old friend Jimmy Kowalski, who'd worked alongside me at Local 683 for 15 years before retiring to run a small appliance repair shop. "Harry, good to hear from you, buddy." Jimmy's voice carried the perpetual cheer of a man who'd found contentment in his golden years. "How you holding up?" "Could use some advice, Jim. You remember how we used to joke about trusting our gut when something looked off on a job site?" "Sure do. Saved our bacon more times than I can count. What's going on?" I told him about the chicken, about Ashley's strange behavior, about feeling unwell after the delivery. Jimmy listened without interruption, occasionally making small sounds of concern. "You know what, Harry? My nephew Danny works for the health department, food safety division. Why don't I give him a call, see if he can take a look at this bird? Might put your mind at ease. I don't want to make a big deal out of nothing. Harry, you're not the type to imagine problems. If something feels wrong to you, it probably is. Besides, Danny owes me a favor. I fixed his refrigerator last month for free." We arranged for Danny Kowalski to stop by Wednesday evening after his regular shift. He was a thin, serious young man with his uncle's honest eyes and a methodical approach that reminded me of the best electricians I'd worked with. "Mr. Mitchell, Uncle Jimmy says you've got some concerns about some poultry." Danny set a small cooler on my kitchen table, along with what looked like a testing kit. I retrieved the chicken from my freezer, noticing again how the packaging seemed to have deteriorated since I'd first examined it. Danny put on latex gloves and carefully examined the wrapping, making notes in a small notebook. "This label's been tampered with," he said, pointing to the torn section I'd noticed. "See how it's been peeled back and restuck? And there's something here." He squinted at the plastic. "Looks like someone tried to scratch off a date stamp." My chest tightened. What would that mean? Could mean nothing. Could mean someone was trying to hide how old this meat is. He carefully unwrapped the chicken, examining it under a small flashlight. "The color looks off to me," Chicken should be pinkish white when it's fresh, even frozen. This has a grayish tint. He took several samples, sealing them in small containers with official-looking labels. I'll run these through our lab, check for bacterial contamination, spoilage indicators, that kind of thing. Should have results by Friday. After Danny left, I sat in Barbara's chair, trying to process what I'd learned. Someone had tampered with the packaging, tried to hide the date. The chicken looked wrong to a professional food safety inspector. And my daughter had sent it to me as a Father's Day gift, laughing when she told me it came from her trash. The implications were too terrible to fully consider, but they crept around the edges of my consciousness like shadows at dusk. Thursday brought another call from Ashley, her voice bright with what I was beginning to recognize as forced cheerfulness. "Dad, I've been thinking about you. How are you feeling? You sounded a little under the weather when we talked." "I'm fine," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. I'd been tired all week, with periodic waves of nausea that came and went without explanation. Good. Listen, I wanted to ask you something. Derek and I have been talking about the future, about making sure you're taken care of as you get older. Here it comes, I thought. Another practical suggestion. Another helpful gift I hadn't asked for. We think it might be smart for you to update your will. Make sure everything is organized properly. I could help you find a good lawyer. Maybe even come with you to make sure you don't miss anything important. My will is fine, Ashley. Your mother and I had everything updated after she got sick. But that was over a year ago, Dad. Things change. Your financial situation, your health needs, the value of the house. It's important to keep these things current. Her persistence struck me as odd. Barbara and I had indeed updated our wills when she was diagnosed with the heart condition that eventually killed her, but Ashley had never shown interest in such details before. Now she seemed almost urgent about it. "I'll think about it," I said. "Well, don't think too long. These things are important, and you never know what might happen. I mean, you're getting older and living alone at your age." She let the sentence hang unfinished, but the implication was clear. I was vulnerable, aging, potentially one accident away from needing significant help. It was a reasonable concern for a daughter to have, but something about the way she presented it felt calculated rather than caring. That evening I called Jimmy again. "The food inspector, your nephew, what did you think of him?" "Danny? He's good people, Harry, straight shooter, knows his stuff." "Why?" "He found problems with that chicken, tampering, spoilage. I'm starting to think—" I paused, reluctant to voice my suspicions even to an old friend. "You're starting to think your daughter sent you bad meat on purpose." The words, spoken aloud by someone else, sounded simultaneously impossible and perfectly logical. "It sounds crazy when you say it like that." "Maybe. Or maybe it sounds like someone who's getting impatient about an inheritance." Jimmy's bluntness was like a slap of cold water. He'd said what I'd been afraid to think, given voice to the terrible possibility that had been growing in my mind like a cancer. "Jesus, Jim, that's my daughter we're talking about." "I know, buddy, I know. But you called me because your gut was telling you something was wrong. How often has your gut been wrong about important things?" I thought about that question long into the night, staring at the ceiling while the house creaked and settled around me. In 32 years of electrical work, my instincts had saved me from countless dangerous situations. Bad wiring had a feel to it, a wrongness that experienced electricians learned to recognize. People, I was learning, might not be so different, and everything about Ashley's behavior recently felt like faulty wiring, superficially normal, but dangerous underneath. Friday afternoon arrived with the weight of inevitability. Danny Kowalski called at 3:47 p.m., his voice carefully professional but unable to mask an underlying tension that made my stomach clench before he'd spoken a single word about his findings. "Mr. Mitchell, I've got the lab results on that chicken sample. Could we meet somewhere private to discuss them? This isn't really a phone conversation." An hour later, we sat in my living room with the afternoon sun streaming through Barbara's sheer curtains. Danny had brought a manila folder thick with official-looking documents, and his expression carried the gravity of someone delivering news that would change everything. "The meat tested positive for several concerning bacterial strains," he began, consulting his notes with the careful precision of someone who understood the weight of his words. "Salmonella, E. coli, and something we don't see very often, Clostridium perfringens. That last one is particularly nasty. In elderly individuals or people with compromised immune systems, it can cause severe gastroenteritis, dehydration, even septic shock in extreme cases. My hands felt cold as I processed this information. How would meat get contaminated like that? Well, that's where it gets interesting. Danny leaned forward, his expression growing more serious. This wasn't accidental spoilage. The bacterial load patterns suggest deliberate contamination. Someone exposed this meat to sewage or animal waste, then tried to mask it by refreezing and repackaging. The room seemed to tilt slightly. You're saying someone did this on purpose? I'm saying the contamination patterns are inconsistent with normal spoilage, and there's something else. He pulled out a photograph from his folder. We found traces of a cleaning product on the packaging, specifically a toilet bowl cleaner containing hydrochloric acid. Someone tried to clean the package after contaminating it, but traces remained. I stared at the photograph, which showed microscopic evidence I couldn't interpret but somehow understood in my bones. My daughter had sent me meat that had been deliberately contaminated with human waste and toilet chemicals. The knowledge sat in my chest like a physical weight, making it hard to breathe. What would have happened if I'd eaten it? Danny's expression grew even more grave. For someone your age, living alone, best case scenario, you'd have been severely ill for several days. Worst case, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. After Danny left, I sat in the gathering dusk, trying to reconcile the little girl who used to make me construction paper cards for Father's Day with someone capable of such calculated cruelty. The evidence was overwhelming, but my heart resisted accepting it. This was Ashley, my baby girl, the child who used to crawl into bed with Barbara and me during thunderstorms. But the evidence whispered otherwise. The tampered packaging, the suspicious timing, her strange laughter when she'd told me it came from the trash, her recent interest in my will, her questions about my health and living situation. A picture was forming that I didn't want to see but couldn't ignore. Saturday morning brought another call from Ashley, her voice carrying that now familiar forced brightness that made my skin crawl. Dad, how are you feeling? You've been on my mind all week. I'm fine, I said, though the word felt like ash in my mouth. Good. Listen, I was wondering, have you given any more thought to what we discussed about updating your will? Her persistence was becoming harder to dismiss as simple concern. Why is this so important to you all of a sudden, Ashley? It's not sudden, Dad. I've been worried about you since Mom died. You're all alone in that big house, getting older, and if something happened. Again, that unfinished sentence, heavy with implication. And what exactly do you think might happen? There was a pause, just long enough for me to hear her recalculating her approach. Well, anything really. Falls are very common in elderly people. Food poisoning, heart attacks, strokes. You just never know. Food poisoning. The words hung in the air between us like an accusation. Had she meant to include that specific danger, or was it my suspicious mind reading meaning into innocent concern? I've been thinking about your Father's Day gift, I said carefully. That chicken you sent. Oh? Her voice sharpened almost imperceptibly. Did you cook it? How was it? Actually, I haven't prepared it yet. I was wondering. You mentioned it came from your freezer, from the back where it had been forgotten. How long would you estimate it had been there? Another pause, longer this time. Well, it's hard to say exactly. Maybe a few months. Time gets away from you, you know. And when Derek bought it, do you remember where he shopped? I'm curious about the brand. Dad, why all these questions? It's just a chicken. There was an edge in her voice now, tension bleeding through the carefully maintained cheerfulness. I'm just interested. Humor an old man. I really don't remember the details, Dad. It was just something Derek picked up somewhere. I should go. We have plans today. She hung up quickly, leaving me staring at the phone. Her evasiveness, the way she deflected every specific question, felt like confirmation of what I'd already started to believe. Ashley knew exactly where that chicken had come from and what she'd done to it. That afternoon, I called Eleanor Peterson. Eleanor, I need to ask you something confidential, something about Ashley. Of course, dear. What's troubling you? I told her about the contaminated chicken, about Danny's findings, about Ashley's recent behavior. Eleanor listened in growing horror, occasionally making small sounds of dismay. Harold, that's attempted murder. Hearing the words spoken aloud by someone else made them real in a way I hadn't been prepared for. I know, but she's my daughter, Eleanor. How do I even process something like this? You process it by protecting yourself, Eleanor said with surprising firmness, and by getting help. This isn't something you can handle alone. She was right, of course. The magnitude of what Ashley had attempted, what she might attempt again, was beyond anything I could navigate by myself. But the thought of involving authorities, of publicly accusing my own daughter of trying to kill me, felt like stepping off a cliff into an abyss I might never climb out of. There's something else, Eleanor said quietly. Something I probably should have mentioned before. About 2 weeks ago, Ashley came by while you were at your doctor's appointment. She asked if I had a spare key to your house, said she wanted to surprise you by cleaning while you were out. My blood chilled. Did you give her one? No, I didn't feel comfortable with that. But Harold, she seemed very interested in getting inside when you weren't there. She kept asking when your next appointment was, how long you'd be gone. The pieces of a larger pattern were falling into place, creating a picture so disturbing I could barely stand to look at it. Ashley hadn't just sent me contaminated meat as a one-time attempt. She was planning something bigger, something that required access to my house when I wasn't there, something that would look like an accident. The weekend passed in a haze of terrible clarity. Every interaction with Ashley over the past 18 months took on new meaning when viewed through the lens of calculated malice rather than daughterly concern. The practical gifts weren't expressions of love. They were reconnaissance, ways to monitor my health, my habits, my vulnerabilities. Monday morning, I made a decision that felt both necessary and heartbreaking. I called Detective Maria Santos at the Maplewood Police Department, a woman I'd met briefly after Barbara's funeral when she'd stopped by to check on me during a community wellness visit. Mr. Mitchell, what can I do for you today? Detective Santos, I need to report something. It's about my daughter, and I'm afraid it's going to sound unbelievable. Why don't you come down to the station this afternoon? We can talk privately. The police station smelled like industrial coffee and floor wax, familiar scents from the municipal buildings where I'd done electrical work over the years. Detective Santos was a compact woman in her 40s with intelligent eyes and the kind of patient demeanor that probably served her well in dealing with difficult situations. I told her everything: the contaminated chicken, Danny's lab results, Ashley's recent behavior, Eleanor's observations. She took notes without judgment, asking clarifying questions with the thoroughness of someone who understood that details matter. Mr. Mitchell, these are serious allegations. Before we proceed, I want you to understand what you're claiming. You believe your daughter deliberately sent you contaminated meat with the intent to harm you. I believe she was trying to kill me, I said, the words feeling like broken glass in my throat. And I think she's planning to try again. Detective Santos studied me for a long moment. What makes you think she'll try again? I told her about Ashley's interest in my will, her questions about accessing the house, her persistent calls checking on my health. She's been setting something up, creating a pattern of concern that will look natural when something happens to me. We'll need to handle this carefully. If your daughter is indeed planning something, we don't want to tip her off before we have enough evidence to act. Are you willing to work with us on this? The next few days unfolded with surreal precision. Detective Santos arranged for discreet surveillance of my house and tapped my phone with my consent. A female officer named Janet Riley, who looked enough like Eleanor Peterson to pass casual scrutiny, moved in with Eleanor temporarily to provide additional security. Ashley called Tuesday evening, her voice carrying a new urgency that made my skin crawl. Dad, I've been thinking more about your situation. Derek and I want to take you out to dinner this weekend. Somewhere nice. Our treat. That's generous of you, sweetheart. The endearment felt like poison on my tongue, but Detective Santos had coached me to maintain normal behavior. Saturday night? We could pick you up around 6. I know this great place in Columbus that specializes in comfort food for seniors. The specificity struck me as odd. Why would a restaurant specialize in food for seniors? And why Columbus, which was an hour drive from Maplewood when there were perfectly good restaurants locally? Sounds wonderful, I said, hating every word. Perfect. And Dad? Don't eat too much during the day Saturday. We want you to have a good appetite for dinner. After she hung up, I called Detective Santos immediately. She wants to take me to dinner Saturday, in Columbus. She specifically told me not to eat much during the day. That's concerning. Columbus is outside our immediate jurisdiction, and telling you not to eat suggests she might be planning to give you something that would work better on an empty stomach. What do we do? We'll have officers in Columbus ready to respond. But Mr. Mitchell, I need you to understand the risks. If we're right about your daughter's intentions, Saturday night could be dangerous. If we're wrong, I'll have destroyed my relationship with my only child for nothing. And if we're right, you'll be alive to rebuild it someday. Wednesday brought flowers, a beautiful arrangement of daisies and roses delivered to my front door with a card that read, "Thinking of you, Dad. Can't wait for our dinner Saturday. Love, Ashley." The gesture would have seemed loving if I hadn't known what I knew. Now it felt like flowers for my funeral, delivered early. Thursday evening, Ashley called again. "Dad, I'm so excited about Saturday. Derek's really looking forward to getting to know you better." I'm looking forward to it too. Each lie felt like swallowing broken glass. Oh, and I wanted to mention, Derek has some business associates who might join us, important people. I hope you don't mind, but I thought it might be good for you to meet some successful people. Maybe get some advice about investments and planning for the future. Business associates at a family dinner. More strangers to witness whatever she had planned, or perhaps to provide alibis for her and Derek. The scope of her planning was becoming clear, and it was more sophisticated than I'd imagined. That sounds interesting. Great. And Dad? Wear something nice. Maybe that blue shirt Mom bought you for Christmas 2 years ago, the one that brings out your eyes. After we hung up, I sat in the gathering darkness, wondering if Ashley was choosing my burial outfit or simply trying to make me look dignified for whatever scene she was planning. The blue shirt was indeed flattering. Barbara had always said it made me look distinguished. Would Ashley want me to look my best for my final public appearance? Friday passed with agonizing slowness. Detective Santos called to confirm the arrangements. Plainclothes officers would be stationed at the restaurant. Others would follow Ashley and Derek from Columbus, and emergency medical personnel would be standing by. "Mr. Mitchell, are you sure you want to go through with this? We could arrest her now, based on the contaminated meat evidence. But that wouldn't prove she was planning something bigger, would it? She could claim the chicken was an accident, a misunderstanding. I need to know for certain what she's capable of." "You're a brave man, Harold." "I'm a foolish old man who can't accept that his daughter wants him dead. There's a difference." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the bed I'd shared with Barbara for 38 years, staring at the ceiling and trying to prepare myself for whatever Saturday would bring. Somewhere in Columbus, my daughter was making final preparations for what she believed would be my last dinner. The thought should have filled me with terror, but instead I felt a strange calm, the peace that comes from finally understanding the truth, no matter how terrible it might be. In the morning, I would put on the blue shirt Barbara had chosen, the one that brought out my eyes, and I would go to dinner with the daughter who was trying to kill me. And finally, we would both discover exactly who Ashley Mitchell had become. Saturday arrived with the weight of a reckoning I'd spent my entire adult life hoping to avoid. I dressed carefully in the blue shirt Barbara had chosen, my hands surprisingly steady as I knotted the tie she'd matched to it. In the mirror, I looked like a man preparing for an important dinner, not someone walking knowingly into what might be an assassination attempt. Detective Santos called at 5 o'clock to confirm the surveillance team was in position. "Mr. Mitchell, I want to be absolutely clear about the protocol. You're wearing the wire, and we'll be monitoring every word. If you feel you're in immediate danger, use the code phrase, 'I think I should call Eleanor.' That's our signal to move in immediately. And if she actually tries to poison me, Dr. Kim will be standing by with the antidote protocols for the most common toxins. But Harold, we can't prepare for everything. Are you absolutely certain you want to do this?" I thought about the contaminated chicken, about Ashley's laughter when she'd told me it came from the trash, about 18 months of calculated manipulation disguised as daughterly concern. I'm certain. Ashley and Derek arrived at exactly 6 o'clock in Derek's silver BMW, the one that cost more than my annual pension. Ashley looked stunning. Black dress, pearl earrings that had belonged to Barbara, her hair styled in a way that emphasized her resemblance to her mother. She looked like someone going to an expensive dinner, not someone planning murder. "Dad, you look so handsome." She hugged me with what felt like genuine affection, and for a moment I wondered if I'd lost my mind. if grief and paranoia had led me to imagine a conspiracy that didn't exist. Derek shook my hand with the practiced firmness of a man who'd learned to project success. "Mr. Mitchell, good to see you again. Ashley's been so excited about tonight." During the drive to Columbus, Ashley kept up a stream of cheerful conversation about Derek's business ventures, her own career prospects, their plans for a vacation to Europe in the fall. She sounded like any loving daughter sharing her life with her father, and I found myself clinging to the hope that I'd been catastrophically wrong about everything. The restaurant was exactly what Ashley had described, upscale but comfortable, the kind of place that catered to an older clientele with its subdued lighting and traditional American menu. Ashley had reserved a private dining room in the back, she explained, so we could talk freely without disturbing other diners. "I hope you don't mind," she said as we were seated, "but Derek's business associates are running a little late. They should be here shortly." The private room felt suddenly smaller, more intimate than I'd expected. Just the three of us around a table set for 6, with wine glasses already poured and a bottle of expensive-looking red wine breathing on the side table. "Dad, Derek and I have been talking," Ashley began once we'd ordered, her voice taking on a tone I'd learned to recognize as artificially bright. "We're really concerned about you living alone in that big house. What if something happened? What if you had a fall or got sick and no one found you for days? I have Eleanor next door. She checks on me regularly." "But that's not really enough, is it?" Derek interjected smoothly. "Mrs. Peterson is what, 75? She can't be expected to take care of herself and monitor your well-being, too." "We've been researching assisted living facilities," Ashley continued, pulling out a glossy brochure from her purse. "Look at this place, Golden Years Manor. It's beautiful, and they have full medical staff on site 24 hours a day." I glanced at the brochure, noting the prominent price list. Golden Years Manor was expensive, the kind of place that would require selling my house and liquidating most of my assets to afford. "It looks very nice, but I'm not ready for assisted living." "Dad, you say that now, but what happens when you're not capable of making that decision anymore?" Ashley's voice carried a note of urgency that seemed disproportionate to the conversation. "What if you develop dementia or have a stroke? Someone needs to have legal authority to make decisions for your care. That's why we think you should update your will to include healthcare directives," Derek added. "Make Ashley your power of attorney now, while you're still mentally competent." The word "still" hung in the air like a threat. I was still mentally competent, implying that this state was temporary, that decline was inevitable and imminent. "I've brought the paperwork," Ashley said, producing a folder from her purse. "We found an excellent elder law attorney who specializes in these situations. All you have to do is sign, and you'll have peace of mind knowing everything is properly arranged." I stared at the documents she spread before me. Power of attorney forms, healthcare directives, a revised will that left everything to Ashley with Derek as secondary beneficiary. The papers were professionally prepared, complete in every detail except for my signature. "This seems very comprehensive," I said carefully. "When did you have time to arrange all this?" "We've been working on it for weeks," Ashley said, her eyes bright with an excitement that no longer looked like filial concern. "Ever since we started talking about your future care needs." "Ashley, I haven't agreed to any future care needs." "But Dad, you have to be realistic. You're 63 years old, you live alone, and you've been having health issues lately. Just this week you mentioned feeling tired and nauseous. What if it's something serious?" How did she know about my recent illness? I'd only mentioned feeling unwell to Eleanor, and only briefly, unless she'd been monitoring my health more closely than I'd realized. "The wine is excellent," Derek said, refilling my glass though I'd barely touched it. "It's a special vintage, very rare. Ashley thought you'd appreciate something distinctive for such an important evening." I picked up the wine glass, noting its deep red color, its rich aroma that couldn't quite mask an underlying chemical scent that reminded me of the cleaning supplies in my garage. The surveillance team would be watching, listening, ready to intervene if I used the code phrase. "Before I sign anything," I said, setting down the untouched wine, "I'd like to understand something. Ashley, you mentioned that Derek's business associates would be joining us tonight. Where are they?" Ashley and Derek exchanged a quick glance, a moment of silent communication that confirmed my worst fears. They were delayed, Ashley said. Last-minute business emergency, but that's okay. This gives us more time to focus on your paperwork. And these documents, they were prepared by an attorney you found? Yes, a specialist in elder law, very reputable. What's his name? Another glance between them. Johnson, Derek said. Robert Johnson. And where is his office? Downtown Columbus, Ashley said quickly. Dad, why all these questions? Don't you trust us? The moment had arrived. I could continue playing along, perhaps drink the contaminated wine and hope the surveillance team could save me in time, or I could force the confrontation that would finally reveal the truth about what my daughter had become. I trust you completely, I said, looking directly into Ashley's eyes. That's why I know you'll understand when I tell you I had that chicken you sent me tested by the county health department, the one you said came from your trash. Ashley's face went very still. What? It was contaminated with sewage, Ashley. Deliberately contaminated. Someone had exposed it to human waste and toilet bowl cleaner before packaging it up and sending it to me. The color drained from her face, but Derek leaned forward aggressively. Mr. Mitchell, that's a very serious accusation. It's also a very serious crime. Attempted murder, to be precise. Dad, I don't know what you're talking about, Ashley said, but her voice had lost all pretense of warmth. That chicken came from my freezer, just like I told you. No, Ashley, that chicken came from a plan to kill your father that you've been working on for months. The practical gifts, the questions about my will, the insistence on updating my healthcare directives. You've been setting up my murder to look like natural causes. You're being paranoid, Derek said. This is exactly the kind of confused thinking that proves you need professional care. I picked up the wine glass again, swirling the liquid and watching how it caught the light. Like this wine, what's in it, Ashley? The same thing that was on the chicken? Nothing's in the wine, she snapped, her composure finally cracking. You're crazy, just like Mom said you'd become. The words hung between us like a confession. Barbara had never said any such thing about me, which meant Ashley was revealing thoughts she'd attributed to her mother to justify her actions. I think I should call Eleanor, I said clearly, activating the code phrase that would bring the surveillance team running. Ashley's face twisted with fury and desperation. You stupid old man, do you have any idea how much money you're sitting on? That house, your pension, the life insurance, everything just wasting away while you play at being independent. So you decided to kill me for it. I decided to help you die with dignity before you became a burden on everyone around you. But you're too stubborn to die naturally, so we had to be creative. Derek grabbed her arm, trying to stop her confession, but it was too late. The doors burst open, and Detective Santos entered with 2 uniformed officers, their weapons drawn. Ashley Mitchell, Derek Brennan, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and attempted poisoning. As they read Ashley her rights, she stared at me with a hatred so pure it took my breath away. You were supposed to die, Dad. You were supposed to eat that chicken and die quietly, and I was supposed to inherit everything. You've ruined everything. The daughter I'd raised, the little girl I'd taught to ride a bicycle and helped with homework and walked down the aisle at her wedding, had just confessed to planning my murder. The knowledge sat in my chest like a physical weight, making it hard to breathe. But at least now I knew the truth. The Columbus Police Department's interrogation rooms were stark under fluorescent lighting, all beige walls and metal furniture designed to strip away pretense. Through the one-way mirror, I watched my daughter break apart like ice under spring sun, her carefully constructed facade crumbling as Detective Santos and her Columbus counterpart, Detective Rodriguez, methodically dismantled her story. Ashley, we have the contaminated chicken, the lab reports, and your confession recorded in the restaurant, Detective Santos said with professional calm. What we need to understand now is the scope of your planning. How long have you been trying to kill your father? I couldn't see Ashley's face from my angle, but I could hear the venom in her voice when she answered. I wasn't trying to kill him. I was trying to help him die before he became a vegetable like my mother did. The lie about Barbara stung, but it also revealed something crucial about Ashley's psychology. She'd rewritten history to justify her actions, convinced herself that murder was mercy. The chicken was just the beginning, wasn't it? Detective Rodriguez pressed. Tell us about the wine tonight. What was in it? Derek, seated across from Ashley in handcuffs, looked like a man who'd suddenly realized he was drowning. I want a lawyer, he said for the third time. I'm not saying anything else without a lawyer. But Ashley seemed beyond such practical concerns now. The mask had slipped completely, revealing something cold and calculating that had probably been growing behind her smile for months. Antifreeze, she said with disturbing matter-of-factness. Ethylene glycol. Derek researched it online. It's sweet, masks well in wine, and causes kidney failure that looks like natural causes in elderly people. My hands shook as I processed this information. If I'd drunk that wine, if the surveillance team hadn't been there to stop me, I would have died slowly over several days, my organs shutting down one by one while Ashley played the grieving daughter at my bedside. The antifreeze was Derek's idea, Ashley continued, apparently eager to share blame now that secrecy was pointless. He said it was cleaner than the biological contamination method, less chance of investigation. How long have you two been planning this? Detective Santos asked. Since right after Mom's funeral, Ashley said. Derek ran the numbers on Dad's assets. The house is worth about $200,000. His pension continues for 5 years after death, plus there's the life insurance Mom left him. We figured if we were smart about it, we could make it look natural. $200,000. My life, reduced to a profit margin in my daughter's business plan with her boyfriend. The casual way she discussed it, as if she were talking about a real estate transaction instead of patricide, chilled me more than any scream of rage could have. Detective Rodriguez leaned forward. Ashley, your father is 63 years old and in good health. He could live another 20 years. Were you really that impatient for an inheritance? You don't understand. Ashley's voice took on a whining quality that reminded me sickeningly of her teenage years. Derek's business opportunities require capital, real money, not just credit cards and bank loans. And Dad was just wasting everything, living in that big house by himself, hoarding money like some kind of miser. So you decided to speed things along. We decided to solve multiple problems at once. Dad gets to avoid the indignity of a long decline. I get the resources I need to build a proper future, and everyone wins. Everyone except me, apparently. In Ashley's calculation, my death was a win-win scenario, a practical solution to the inconvenience of my continued existence. Derek finally spoke up, his composure cracking. This is insane, Ashley. You're making it sound like we planned everything from the beginning, but you're the one who came up with the chicken idea. I just suggested the wine as a backup. A backup? Detective Santos pounced on this admission. So there were multiple attempts planned? The room fell silent except for the hum of the ventilation system and the scratch of Detective Rodriguez's pen on his notepad. Through the mirror, I could see Ashley's shoulders shaking. Whether from rage or fear, I couldn't tell. There were contingencies, she said finally. The chicken was supposed to work, but Dad's paranoid. Always has been. So we needed something more direct for tonight. What other contingencies? Ashley's laugh was bitter, hollow. You want the whole list? Fine. After the chicken didn't work, we talked about tampering with his medications, switching his blood pressure pills for something that would cause a heart attack. We looked into making his stairs slippery so he'd fall and break his neck. Derek even researched how to cause a gas leak that would look accidental. Each revelation was like a physical blow. My daughter and her boyfriend had spent months planning different ways to murder me, discussing my death over dinner like a couple planning their vacation itinerary. But the wine seemed cleanest, Derek added, apparently deciding cooperation might reduce his sentence. Quick acting, looks like organ failure, and the restaurant setting would provide witnesses to his apparent good health before sudden decline. You were going to watch me die, I said, speaking for the first time since entering the observation room. Detective Santos had warned me to stay quiet, but I couldn't contain the question any longer. You were going to sit there and watch me drink poison and make small talk while I died. Ashley turned toward the mirror as if she could see me through it. You weren't supposed to know, Dad. It was supposed to be peaceful. You would have felt sleepy, maybe a little sick, and by the time you got to the hospital it would have been too late, but you wouldn't have suffered. Her version of mercy, murder disguised as kindness, patricide packaged as compassion. The psychological gymnastics required to justify attempted murder as an act of love would have been impressive if they hadn't been directed at ending my life. Ashley, Detective Santos said, I need you to understand the gravity of your situation. You're facing charges of conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, and elder abuse. In Ohio, these charges carry potential sentences of 15 to life. Derek, as your accomplice, faces similar charges. For the first time since her arrest, Ashley seemed to grasp the reality of her situation. Her face paled, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a tremor that hadn't been there before. "I want to make a deal," she said. "I'll testify against Derek, tell you everything about his role in this. He's the one who researched the methods, who pushed for the more aggressive approaches." "Hey!" Derek shouted. "That's bullshit. The whole thing was your idea from day one." And there it was. Honor among thieves dissolving under pressure, my daughter and her accomplice turning on each other like rats in a trap. Within minutes, they were contradicting each other's stories, each trying to minimize their own role while maximizing their partner's culpability. Detective Santos emerged from the interrogation room an hour later, her expression grim. "Mr. Mitchell, I want you to know that both suspects have provided detailed confessions. The evidence against them is overwhelming. The contaminated chicken, the poisoned wine, recorded confessions, and now their statements implicating each other in the broader conspiracy. What happens next? They'll be arraigned Monday morning. Given the severity of the charges and the flight risk, I expect bail will be denied. The district attorney will likely offer plea deals, but even with cooperation, they're looking at significant prison time." I nodded, trying to process the finality of it. By Monday, my daughter would be behind bars, her life effectively over at 32. Her boyfriend, the man she'd chosen over her own father's life, would likely spend the next decade or more in prison. "Detective, I need to ask you something. I need to ask. In your professional opinion, if I hadn't gotten suspicious about the chicken, if I'd eaten it and gotten sick but survived, would they have tried again?" Detective Santos considered the question carefully. "Based on their confessions and the planning we've uncovered, yes. I believe they would have continued escalating until they succeeded. Your daughter seems to have developed what psychologists call goal fixation. She became so focused on the outcome that she lost sight of normal moral boundaries. The daughter I'd raised was gone, replaced by someone capable of calculating the most efficient way to murder her own father. That person would spend the next several decades in prison, and I would spend the rest of my life knowing that the little girl I'd taught to ride a bicycle had grown up to plan my death. But I would spend it alive, which was more than Ashley had planned to allow. The weeks following Ashley's arrest passed in a strange suspension between relief and grief. I was alive, a fact that required daily conscious acknowledgement. But the daughter I'd spent 32 years loving was effectively dead, replaced by someone I didn't recognize and couldn't mourn properly. Eleanor Peterson became my anchor during those difficult days, bringing casseroles and sitting with me through the long evenings when the house felt too quiet and too full of memories simultaneously. She'd lost a son to cancer 5 years earlier, and she understood the particular anguish of loving someone who no longer existed in any meaningful way. "Grief doesn't follow rules, Harold," she told me one Tuesday evening as we sat on my front porch watching the fireflies blink among her roses. "You're mourning Ashley as surely as if she'd died in a car accident. In some ways, she did die. The person who raised you didn't become this person overnight." The legal proceedings moved forward with mechanical precision. Ashley and Derek were denied bail, as Detective Santos had predicted. The district attorney's office, led by prosecutor Jennifer Walsh, built an airtight case around the physical evidence, the recorded confessions, and what she called a pattern of escalating elder abuse with intent to commit homicide. I testified before the grand jury in late August, recounting the contaminated chicken, the suspicious gifts, Ashley's increasing focus on my will and financial situation. Speaking the words aloud in that sterile courthouse room made everything feel simultaneously more real and more surreal. "Mr. Mitchell," Prosecutor Walsh asked during my testimony, "in your opinion, would your daughter have continued attempting to harm you if she hadn't been caught?" "Yes," I said, the word feeling like lead in my mouth. "I believe she would have tried until she succeeded." The grand jury returned indictments on all charges: conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, elder abuse, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Ashley would face trial in November. Derek's attorney was already negotiating a plea deal that would require his testimony against her, but it was the victim impact statement that proved most difficult to write. How do you quantify the damage done when your own child tries to murder you? How do you explain to a court the specific pain of learning that someone you'd have died to protect was willing to kill you for money? I worked on the statement for weeks, writing and rewriting, trying to find words adequate to the betrayal. Finally, I called Detective Santos for advice. Mr. Mitchell, I've read hundreds of victim impact statements over the years. The most powerful ones aren't about revenge or punishment. They're about truth. Tell the judge what this has cost you, not just financially or physically, but emotionally and psychologically. In the end, I wrote about the dreams that woke me at 3 a.m, visions of Ashley as a little girl asking for bedtime stories, juxtaposed with images of her carefully measuring antifreeze into a wine glass. I wrote about the photographs I'd had to put away because seeing her face caused physical pain. I wrote about the conversations with my grandsons, Tyler and Connor, now 14 and 12, trying to explain why their mother was in prison without destroying their capacity to trust other people. Your Honor, I wrote in the final paragraph, I don't want my daughter to suffer more than necessary, but I need the court to understand that she didn't just try to kill me. She killed the relationship between us, the trust that took 32 years to build, and my ability to feel safe in the world. Those are losses I'll carry for whatever time I have left. The plea negotiations collapsed in October when Ashley refused to accept responsibility for her actions. According to Prosecutor Walsh, Ashley maintained that she'd been trying to help me avoid the indignity of decline, and that Derek had pushed her toward more aggressive methods she wouldn't have chosen independently. She's created a narrative where she's the victim, Walsh explained during a meeting in her office. In her version, Derek manipulated her grief and concern for your welfare into something criminal. She genuinely seems to believe she was acting out of love. The trial began November 15th with jury selection that took 3 days. I sat in the gallery watching potential jurors wrestle with the concept of a daughter plotting her father's murder, seeing some of them glance at me with expressions ranging from pity to incomprehension. How could such a thing happen? What kind of father raises a child capable of this? Those same questions haunted me during the prosecution's opening statements, when Prosecutor Walsh methodically laid out the timeline of Ashley's planning. The practical gifts that were actually reconnaissance, the increasingly urgent conversations about my will and healthcare directives, the research into poisons and methods of causing apparent accidents. Ladies and gentlemen, Walsh told the jury, this was not a crime of passion or a moment of poor judgment. This was a calculated months-long conspiracy to commit murder for financial gain, made more heinous by the fact that the victim trusted his attackers completely. Ashley's defense attorney, a sharp-dressed woman named Rebecca Torres, painted a different picture in her opening statement. Ashley was a grieving daughter, overwhelmed by worry for her aging father's well-being, manipulated by an older, more sophisticated boyfriend into actions she never would have taken alone. Ashley Mitchell loves her father, Torres argued. Did she make terrible decisions under the influence of Derek Brennan? Yes. Did she conspire to commit murder? No. She conspired to help a father she saw as suffering, and when Derek pushed those good intentions in criminal directions, she was too emotionally compromised to see clearly. Watching Ashley during the opening statements was like looking at a stranger who happened to share my daughter's face. She'd lost weight during her months in jail, and her hair had grown out from its stylish cut into something plainer, more vulnerable. When Torres described her as a manipulated victim, Ashley nodded slightly, apparently convinced by her own defense. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. Danny Kowalski testified about the contaminated chicken. Detective Santos walked the jury through the surveillance operation and Ashley's recorded confession. Derek Brennan, looking hollow and defeated in his orange jumpsuit, testified about their planning sessions, their research into various murder methods, their discussion of my assets and how to access them quickly after my death. She called it solving Dad's loneliness problem. Derek testified, his voice barely audible in the hushed courtroom. But we both knew what we were really talking about. We were talking about killing him for his money. Ashley stared at him with undisguised hatred as he spoke, mouthing the word liar when he described her as the driving force behind the murder plot. Whatever love had existed between them had curdled into mutual recrimination and blame. The defense's case lasted 2 days and centered on character witnesses who testified about Ashley's devotion to me and Barbara during our marriage. Her former boss described her as conscientious and caring. A neighbor from her childhood recalled how she'd helped shovel my driveway every winter until she left for college. Ashley herself took the stand on the final day, crying as she described her fear that I would suffer the same slow decline that had claimed Barbara. "I never wanted to hurt my father," she said, dabbing at her eyes with tissues provided by her attorney. "I wanted to save him from pain. Derek convinced me that Dad would want to die with dignity rather than become a burden." Under cross-examination, Prosecutor Walsh methodically destroyed Ashley's victim narrative. "Ms. Mitchell, if you were truly concerned about your father's dignity, why didn't you discuss end-of-life preferences with him directly?" I didn't think he'd be honest about his fears." "So you decided to make that choice for him?" "I thought I was protecting him by sending him contaminated meat that could have killed him slowly and painfully." Ashley's composure cracked. "That wasn't supposed to hurt him. Derek said it would just make him sick enough to go to the hospital where they could help him pass peacefully." The absurdity of her logic, that poisoning me was intended to help me, seemed to dawn on the jury members, several of whom exchanged glances of disbelief. "And the antifreeze in the wine, was that also intended to help your father pass peacefully?" "I never wanted it to get that far. The chicken was supposed to work." "Ms. Mitchell, you just testified that you never wanted to hurt your father, but you also just admitted that you poisoned food you sent him, hoping it would work to make him fatally ill. Do you understand the contradiction in those statements?" Ashley's face crumpled, and for a moment I saw glimpses of the little girl who used to cry when she broke one of Barbara's figurines. But the moment passed, replaced by something harder. "You don't understand," she said, her voice rising. "None of you understand what it's like to watch your father waste away alone, sitting on money that could change your life while he just exists. I was trying to help everyone." The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned with guilty verdicts on all counts, Ashley collapsed in her chair, finally understanding that her version of reality wasn't shared by 12 of her peers. Judge Margaret Coleman sentenced her to 25 years to life, with the possibility of parole in 20 years. Derek received 15 years as part of his plea agreement. "Ms. Mitchell," Judge Coleman said before pronouncing sentence, "I've read your father's victim impact statement, and I've listened to your testimony. What strikes me most is your apparent inability to understand the fundamental wrongness of your actions. You betrayed the most basic trust that exists between parent and child, and you did so for money. The court can impose a sentence, but only you can choose whether to spend the next 2 decades learning to feel genuine remorse for what you've done." As they led Ashley away in shackles, she looked back at me once. I'd hoped to see some flicker of the daughter I'd raised, some sign that she finally understood the magnitude of what she'd lost. Instead, I saw only resentment, as if I had betrayed her by refusing to die on schedule. 2 years have passed since Ashley's sentencing, and I've learned that healing doesn't follow the neat timeline I'd expected. Some days I wake up and momentarily forget that my daughter is in prison for trying to kill me. Other days the reality settles on me like a lead blanket, making even simple tasks feel insurmountable. I still live in the house on Elm Street, though I've made some changes. The kitchen has been renovated, new countertops, fresh paint, modern appliances. I couldn't bring myself to cook in the same space where I'd opened that contaminated chicken, where Ashley had sat planning my death over cups of coffee Barbara had served in better times. The physical renovation helped, but the emotional renovation continues daily. Eleanor Peterson remains my closest friend and confidant. At 77, she's developed some arthritis in her hands, but she still brings me soup when I'm under the weather and sits with me on summer evenings when the quiet becomes too heavy. We've developed the comfortable companionship of 2 people who've survived their own children in different ways. Her son to cancer, my daughter to whatever psychological transformation turned love into calculation. "You know what I've learned, Harold?" she said last week as we watched Tyler, now 16, mow my lawn with the careful precision of a young man earning his first real money. "We can't protect our children from becoming people we don't recognize. All we can do is love them while they're still themselves and survive them when they're not." Tyler and Connor visit every other Saturday, part of a supervised visitation arrangement their father arranged after Ashley's conviction. Their dad, Ashley's ex-husband, Mark, had divorced her 2 years before Barbara's death, citing irreconcilable differences that now seem ominously prescient. He's remarried a kind woman named Sarah who treats the boys well and seems genuinely concerned about maintaining their relationship with me. The boys know their mother is in prison. You can't hide something like that from teenagers. but we've agreed to let them process the details at their own pace. Tyler, mature beyond his 16 years, asked me directly about the charges 6 months ago. "Grandpa, did Mom really try to kill you?" The question hung between us like a bridge neither of us wanted to cross. I'd spent months preparing for this moment, consulting with a therapist who specialized in family trauma about how to handle such conversations. "She made some very bad decisions, Tyler. Decisions that could have hurt me badly. The court decided those decisions were criminal." "But did she want you dead?" I looked at this young man who had Ashley's eyes, but I hoped none of her capacity for calculation. "I think she convinced herself she wanted what was best for me, but what she actually wanted was what was best for her." Tyler nodded gravely, processing this distinction with the seriousness it deserved. "Are you afraid of her?" "Not anymore. But I'm sad about who she became. I'm sad for you and Connor, losing your mother to prison. And I'm sad for her, losing everything that mattered for money that wouldn't have mattered at all if she'd just been patient." Connor, younger and more protective of his remaining innocence, still talks about visiting his mother when she gets out. I don't have the heart to tell him that 20 years from now, he'll be 32 years old with a life of his own, and the mother he remembers from childhood will be a stranger shaped by decades of incarceration. The house has become a gathering place for what's left of our family. Mark brings the boys for holiday dinners, and we've developed new traditions that don't depend on Ashley's presence. Sarah has proven surprisingly adept at filling some of the emotional gaps, helping Connor with school projects and listening to Tyler's concerns about college applications. Last Christmas, Tyler found me looking through old photo albums, pausing at pictures of Ashley as a child. "You miss her," he said, settling beside me on the couch. "I miss who she used to be, or who I thought she was." "Do you think she misses us?" It was a question I'd wrestled with during many sleepless nights. Did Ashley think about her sons, about me, about the life she'd thrown away for an inheritance that would have been theirs eventually anyway? Or had prison hardened whatever capacity for genuine emotion she'd retained? "I think she misses the life she could have had if she'd made different choices," I told Tyler. "But I don't know if she misses us the way we miss her." The financial aspects of Ashley's crime have been resolved through restitution orders and civil proceedings. The court ordered her to pay for my therapy, for the security modifications to my house, for the legal costs associated with her prosecution. Of course, she has no assets to pay with, and won't for decades, so it's mostly symbolic justice. More practically, I've updated my will to establish trust funds for Tyler and Connor, with distributions beginning when they turn 25 and completing when they're 35. Ashley was removed as beneficiary and executor, replaced by Mark and Sarah as trustees. The house will go to the boys eventually, but I've arranged for Eleanor to have lifetime rights to her adjacent property, ensuring she'll never have to worry about new neighbors who might not understand her value as a friend and community anchor. I still receive letters from Ashley occasionally, forwarded through the prison system. The early ones were full of justifications and blame. I had driven her to desperate measures by refusing to plan properly for my future care. Derek had manipulated her grief into criminal action. The justice system had failed to understand her genuine love for me. But the most recent letter, which arrived last month, carried a different tone. "Dad, I've been working with a therapist here who specializes in family relationships. She's helping me understand some things about myself that are difficult to accept. I know I hurt you in ways that can't be fixed with apologies. I know I destroyed our relationship and Tyler and Connor's trust in me. I know I chose money over love and lost everything that actually mattered. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that I'm finally starting to understand what I became and why that was wrong. I hope Tyler and Connor are doing well in school. I hope you're healthy and not too lonely. I dream sometimes about the father-daughter relationship we had before Mom died, before I became someone neither of us recognizes. I can't change what I did, but I'm trying to change who I am. Maybe someday that will matter to someone. I've read that letter dozens of times, looking for signs of manipulation or self-serving rationalization. Instead, I find something that might be genuine remorse, the beginning of actual accountability rather than elaborate excuse-making. It's not enough to rebuild trust, and it may be too late to rebuild our relationship, but it's something. Eleanor thinks I should respond to the letter. Everyone deserves the chance to change, Harold, even Ashley. I'm not ready yet. Maybe I never will be. But I've kept the letter in Barbara's old jewelry box, alongside the few photos of Ashley I can still bear to look at. Pictures from before she became capable of calculation, when she still looked at me with uncomplicated love. The house feels different now, less haunted by betrayal and more inhabited by acceptance. I've learned to cook again, though I inspect every ingredient with the paranoia of someone who's survived poisoning. I've returned to volunteer work at St. Matthew's, helping with their food pantry and visiting homebound parishioners. Serving others who face genuine hardships has helped me maintain perspective on my own losses. Some evenings, when the light falls just right through the kitchen window, I remember the good times with Ashley, teaching her to change a tire, helping her with college applications, walking her down the aisle at her wedding to Mark. Those memories coexist now with knowledge of what she became, neither erasing the other, but creating a more complex truth about love, family, and the capacity for people to change in ways we never anticipate. I'm 75 now, officially elderly by any measure, but I've never felt more committed to living fully. Ashley's attempt on my life, paradoxically, reminded me how precious and temporary life is. Every morning I wake up is a morning she didn't intend me to have, and I try to make each one count. Tyler will graduate high school next year and has been accepted to Ohio State's engineering program. Connor is developing into a thoughtful young man with his grandfather's practical skills and, I hope, his own capacity for ethical reasoning that wasn't derailed by greed. They are Ashley's greatest legacy, the proof that she was once capable of creating something beautiful, even if she couldn't preserve it. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the playlist now showing on your screen. The fireflies are beginning to blink in Eleanor's garden, and somewhere in a prison cell 200 miles away, Ashley is beginning another night of a sentence that will define the rest of her life. I am alive, surrounded by people who love me genuinely rather than strategically. And that is a victory neither of us expected when she sent me that contaminated chicken 2 years ago. Some stories don't have happy endings, but they can have honest ones. This is mine.